Hi, my name's Phil, and I like talking about politics. And this is the Political Postbox, a weekly look at some of the more engaged with and interesting comments to have appeared on the channel from the past week. And this week, of course, as might be expected, there's a healthy amount of Brexit in there, but also a healthy amount. I feel it's wrong to say a healthy amount of coronavirus, but yeah, that's what it is. But anyway, first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, on to the first one. Actually, the first one, there's not too much to comment about. I just think it's the comment of the week. I don't really do a comment of the week, but if there were to be one, this one has to be this week's. It's truly awesome. Related to Boris Johnson's attitude towards the corona crisis, which is... the virus needs us more than we need the virus. The virus is panicking. We must go for a virus-style deal. Which is absolutely what it is. I mean, the only comment I will add to this, it is quite remarkable just how predictable Boris Johnson's corona response is. Even though it's still shocking, it's really weird. We're shocked by it. We're shocked by the inhumanity. At the same time, should not be surprised at all because it's exactly the same attitude he's taken, to example, for Brexit. But yeah, I have nothing really to say about this one. That's just a quick one to throw in. The first one for me to really comment on. So, someone asking here, why is it that the UK and the USA are putting the economy first while other countries are putting people first? France, Spain in lockdown, Canada, schools shut, universities and colleges closed, travel restrictions. The UK has been led by disgraceful sociopaths. Why is it that they're both putting the economy first? It's in the case of the UK. I mean, the case of the US, it is. I mean, Donald Trump is just Donald Trump, and Republicans. I mean, we have got a very similar situation now in the UK and the US. It wasn't always exactly the same. Even when you've got the Conservatives in charge in the UK, it was never exactly the same because mostly those in charge of the Conservative Party were not on the hard right. And the Republicans, of course, are on the hard right of American politics, where mainstream politics is on the right. Even the Democrats are generally right of centre. But in the UK, we've got this scenario where Boris Johnson knows that pursuing his Brexit is the only way to secure his political survival. He has... A few years ago, when he was umming and ahhing, does he get behind Remain? Does he get behind Leave? And he made a tactical error, a big tactical error. Had he got behind Remain, not only would we not have left the EU, he would still be Prime Minister because David Cameron was going to be leaving anyway. Boris Johnson was probably, he was probably in pole position to get that. So there was no reason for him to have done that. He made a tactical error. It was not a completely unthinking error, but it certainly went badly wrong for him. But he has now nailed his colours to that mast in order to maintain his political power, which is all he's really interested in. People talk about him wanting to do this for money and stuff like that. He's got and it's not just that he's got lots of money. There are more, I would have thought there are more profitable ways for him to have carried on his life post-journalism than to have gone into politics. But he's so it's the power he wants. He likes being Prime Minister. He likes being in charge. He doesn't like being held to account. So he really doesn't like people criticising him in Parliament or in interviews, which is why he tries to stay away from them. And he has this scenario where he knows that Brexit is going to be very, very damaging to the economy. So he has to fool people that it's not very, very damaging to the economy. Now, at the moment, the UK economy is stagnant. It basically means it's pretty much zero growth. And I think it was zero growth in the last quarter. And before that, it was like 0.3%. And he knows he can fool people. He can tell people that the economy is buoyant when it's actually stagnating. What he can't do is fool people if it really crashes very, very badly. So what he needs to do in that scenario is to have something that boosts the economy to try and compensate for the damage that Brexit is going to cause. Because if he can spend lots of money and show lots of government spending, well, governments can only afford to spend lots of money when the economy is doing well, can't it? That's what the Conservatives would say there. In reality, the only money they'll be able to stump up will have to be heavily borrowed. But that's their plan. The corona crisis means that you have a choice. You either put things in place that safeguard as many lives as possible. You cannot save everyone. But that means that you're going to take an economic hit. That is why the corona is going to cause, a global tsunami, because lots of countries have done things to preserve life. That means hitting the economy. Or you can do things that will try and preserve the economy. Again, just like you can't save all lives, if you try and preserve lives, you can't completely negate the economic downside of this, even if you prioritise the economy. But you can prioritise it. That basically means keeping people going to work as much as possible. If they have to self-isolate, trying to get them to work at home. Oh yeah, by the way, all those jobs you were told by your bosses you can't actually do from home, turns out you can after all. If the alternative is going in coughing and spluttering and giving your boss a certain virus, oh yeah, of course you can work at home. That's fine. And ultimately that's what it's about. He knows there's going to be a drag effect on the economy. He wants to minimise it so that he can say that is entirely caused by corona. And also, and this was pretty disgraceful in the Telegraph a couple of weeks ago, it was also noted that allowing the corona to sweep through, of course it's not going to harm the majority of the population. It's not going to be very nice, but it's not going to harm the majority. We're talking about a few percent. But those few percent still represent people. Hundreds of thousands of people, potentially. And the ones who are most likely to succumb are the ones who are most likely to be the least economically active. So the ones who are dependent upon, say, pensions, state pensions or benefits. That is the hope from their point of view, which is quite an appalling thought. But that, unfortunately, is the situation. In the USA, it might be subtly different, but ultimately you've got the same sort of people in charge, don't you? You've got a president who just wants to be able to say it's not my fault. And you've got, other Republicans who are probably very much of the mind of the conservatives that we have in this country at the moment, which are economy before people. Particularly if they think the people most at risk are not them, it's others. They don't care about others. Right, let's move on. We've got something cheerier for number 2. Oh yeah, maybe a little bit. So, it says here, someone's saying here they have provided an extra £500 million a week for the NHS. That's more than the £350 million a week that they promised on the bus. Now it's down to the NHS to do its job. So, several things about this. What I was saying, I think, is where is this £350 million a week that Boris Johnson promised? It doesn't appear to be in the budget. Someone here saying, they've actually said an extra £500 million a week for the NHS. No, they haven't. Well, let's have a look. Worked it out here. Where the hell was it gone? All right, it's 96 million extra a week. Not 500 million, certainly not 350 million. The other thing about this 96 million a week extra for the NHS that the budget actually promised, I don't know where you're getting this information from. I'm guessing you're getting it from a tabloid rather than actually reading the budget. Because when you read the figures in the budget, it's 96 million a week. The other thing to note is, first of all, that money hasn't appeared anywhere. You wouldn't expect it to just yet. This budget is for the coming year. It hasn't even, as far as I know, has it actually? It may have been passed by Parliament now. I didn't pay attention to that. But it comes into effect next month. So it's not there right now. And also, even when it does, there's several things about it. First of all, just because a certain amount of money is budgeted for doesn't mean the NHS gets to spend that money. There was a very famous case last year where Boris Johnson, when he became Prime Minister, said he'd instantly increased the budget for the NHS. He hadn't. It was money that had already been budgeted for the NHS, but they weren't allowed to spend it. He just gave them the all clear to spend the money that had already been budgeted. So there's a classic case of a situation where the government, Theresa May's government in this case, budgeted for a certain amount to say, yeah, we've increased the spending on the NHS by this amount. But it wasn't actually increased spending, it was just increased budget. But if you don't let them spend it all, so what you have to look at is how much they say they're increasing the budget by and what the NHS over the year, let's say the first year, gets to actually spend of it. The other thing is just suddenly throwing the money in doesn't make the problem go away. You say it's now down to the NHS to do its job. Okay, to do its job, it needs hospitals. Boris Johnson promised 40 new hospitals. Now, let's say he was throwing money into the NHS, which he is not when you read the budget. Let's say he was. You can't build 40 new hospitals overnight. they've been closing down hospitals over the last 10 years. You can't suddenly resurrect them. So even if the country had a voted Labour government in December, we'd still be facing a real crisis, because even a Labour government that would have invested in the NHS, you can't turn that money into results immediately, because you need to be able to build the hospitals. You need to be able to hire the staff, and that's not just a money thing. Remember, there is already money in the NHS for tens of thousands more nurses and doctors. Tens of thousands of them. The money was already there. Increasing that money doesn't encourage more nurses and doctors to come, because there's already enough money to increase them. But they're not coming because we're not training enough, and we're also dissuading nurses and doctors from overseas to come and work in the UK, because we've got such a terrible environment for foreigners now. We can't get tested. If the NHS has got all the funding it needs, why aren't we getting tested? In other countries, not all of the countries, but in other countries, if you're developing symptoms, you will be tested. Not in this country. Not in this country, unless you want to pay for it privately. The only people that get tested are those who can afford the £375 to get it done privately, or are so badly ill that they have to be admitted to hospital, at which point, of course, you test them for it then to know where you can put them in the ward, or indeed in which ward, in which hospital to put them. That's the only time you're actually getting tested in this country. So where's the money for that? I talked last week about face masks. So the NHS had ordered a load of face masks in January when they were actually trying to get on top of this crisis, and that order's been blocked because they're being produced in France. The French government said there's a global shortage, we want them face masks. Well, the UK manufactures things too. We manufacture ventilators. We're going to need a lot of ventilators. Are the UK government making sure that we get all the ventilators we need, given that we do produce them in this country? There's been a little bit of a muted sound, like, yeah, maybe we'll think about it. I haven't seen any government action ensuring that will happen. For example, people buy ventilators off us. There will be ventilators that we will need leaving the country. At the very least, you would think any being ordered by France should be kept in this country, requisitioned in this country. Has that happened yet? No. May it happen? It may happen, but it hasn't happened yet. So at the moment, as a result of Boris Johnson's government, we haven't actually seen any concrete sign of the NHS getting anything extra at all. The budget says 96 million a week, not 500, 96. And we haven't seen any of that yet either. None of it has been spent. None of it has been made available yet. We can't even get testing kits. That's the situation. It wasn't actually that jolly, but it was a little more jolly than the first one. Okay, on to the third one. So, another classic one. I'll just explain the background to this one so you've got some context. So I was explaining that every country on earth does the bulk of its trade with its closest neighbours. This is how it's been throughout history. It's how it's happened now, even though we've got better transport systems in the modern day. That's still how it happens, because it's much quicker and easier to trade with people right next to you. So, someone's saying here, you are wrong. Oh. There is one counter-example where a close nation geographically still has very little trade. North and South Korea. They are close but have little trade. Incorrect, I'm afraid. I didn't say that every country on earth trades with all of its immediate neighbours the most. What I said was that the bulk of their trade is with their closest neighbours, which it is in the case of North Korea. Let us remind ourselves of a little bit of geography, which not everyone may be familiar with. That's perfectly understandable. No criticism there. North Korea, there we go. And yes, to the south of it, we have South Korea. That makes sense. To the north of it, we have China, and to the northeast, a little bit of a border with Russia. North Korea, 87% of its exports go to China, its closest neighbour. 90% of imports into North Korea come from China. So 80% of its export trade is with its closest neighbour. 90% of its import trade is with its closest neighbour. This is not a counterexample. This is a really quick and easy one to deal with. That, North Korea is not an exception to this rule. It also does the bulk of its trade with its closest neighbours. The fact, even if there wasn't a bit of a political disagreement with South Korea as well, the bulk of its trade would still be with China, which is as close to North Korea as South Korea is, given that they both have land borders. In fact, technically, you could argue China's even closer because it has a much larger border with North Korea than South Korea does. But it makes no difference. I didn't say it had to trade with each individual closest neighbour. I said with its closest neighbours, that's where the bulk of the trade goes. It does. Hopefully that's that one sorted. Next one. Right, okay, so this is related to the Brexiteer who thought they had a cracking argument going, oh, the EU's love of borders going a bit wrong with coronavirus because they're shutting their borders. Which point everyone basically pointed to them and said, hang on a minute, what you're basically showing there is that the borders are not open via the direction from the EU. The individual countries have control over their own borders because they have been closing them. You know, when Italy went into lockdown, it was Italy that decided to do that. When Slovenia closed its border with Italy, it was Slovenia that chose to do that. When Spain's gone into lockdown, Spain that chose to do that. All of the border restrictions that every EU country has imposed, it has done so because its government made that decision, not the EU. The EU has not been saying any, as a central group, has not been saying anything about it. It's not their decision. It's simply that. And you don't need this event to show that either. You can just read it in the EU's treaties on borders. I did a video, as I say, last week on it. And it's that simple. So, but anyway, this comment, EU's love of borders, Christ, it's like American right-wing talk, have the Brits fallen that far? Yes, and to be honest, I would say, and I'm not as keen a student of American political history as British political history. I'm not saying I'm an expert in British political history beyond my own lifespan, but I think we've basically fallen together because bearing in mind, a lot of people point out that when you think of the policies that Republicans pursue nowadays, it's very different to the policies they were pursuing a couple of generations ago. If you looked at Republican policies of 40, 50 years ago, they're very similar to the policies that the Democrats would now pursue. In other words, the Republicans have shifted further to the right, it would seem. Certainly when it comes to economic policy. You know, maybe they were already on quite far right on other things. But on economic policy, they've shifted ground. And then the UK has as well. And I think we have fallen together. And I suspect we've fallen together for the same reasons, in that both American and British politics are very, very vulnerable to lobbying, to big money, to lots of money being used to basically pay politicians to do what they want them to do against the interests of the population. And then running counter to that, you have a political system which means that when the population in general aren't happy with it, they don't necessarily get to change that government, because both the US and the UK has something in common, which is a divergence from the rest, or much of the rest of Europe, in that we have first past the post electoral systems, which means that the majority does not necessarily get its way. It has to be borne in mind that Boris Johnson got a minority of people voting for the Conservatives. Even if you add on Brexit party votes, that was still a minority. Donald Trump, for example, did not get as many votes as Hillary Clinton in the presidential election. And in a binary, I mean, that was particularly mad. I sort of understand how constituency politics, like parliamentary politics, a first past the post system might make sense for a constituency basis. It's not productive, but you can sort of follow the logic. For a presidential election, you absolutely can't follow the logic, because that's a binary choice, really. You're voting for one person in the whole country. So why isn't it just the one who gets the most votes wins? But it's not, is it? Absolute madness. Absolute madness. But yeah, I think, to be honest, I don't think Britain has followed America's lead in this regard. I think we've both fallen together, and I think we've both fallen as a result of the same people influencing British and American politics, because they are particularly vulnerable to very wealthy individuals doing so. You know, which is sad. It is sad. Next one. So, someone here saying there will be a deal. So this is obviously regarding Boris Johnson's forging a path towards no deal. There will be a deal. This is all just posturing and chest beating by Boris and his minions. Which is, of course, a view that many will hold. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. Even very well-informed people will hold this view. I'm not going to call it a ridiculous view to hold. I just don't agree with it. And the reason I don't agree with it, it assumes that the no-deal Brexit is so damaging that Boris Johnson really doesn't want it, and that he is, as you say, there posturing and chest beating in order to get a deal on better terms. And his actions are not, contrary to that view. You can certainly interpret his actions as this as well. And it could well be the case, indeed, that when we get towards the end of the year and this posturing doesn't work and he doesn't get his concessions, that he will just have a look of blind panic about him as he thinks, holy crap. But that, even if that is the case, it doesn't automatically follow that he will get a deal, because first of all, there won't be enough time to arrange one then. He would have to extend the transition period. He cannot extend the transition period without making it obvious he's done that. Now, I will accept the argument that he could get the closest of all deals. He could get something very much like Norway, which was argued in 2016, where we follow all EU rules, every single one of them. We're a part of every single EU regulatory system, and we pay more for it than we ever did as members, and we get no say whatsoever because we're not a member. We don't have any MEPs, we don't have a seat on the council, we have no say in the commission, nothing at all. I can absolutely believe that he could get a deal like that and sell it to the British public, and all the Brexit supporting members of the public would be none the wiser, because they can't tell you any EU rules anyway, apart from the ones about bendy bananas that don't even exist, or indeed open borders that we've just been discussing, which also don't exist. He could absolutely sell that to the public, no doubt about it. But he can't sell it to the people behind him. There are people behind him, both within the UK and outside the UK, that want the no-deal Brexit. They want the UK to be weakened. Whether they are disaster capitalists inside the UK, whether there are people who will just stand to profit in other ways from deregulation in the country, whether they're external agents such as in Russia that benefit from a weakening of Western powers, there are those who do want the no deal. And they do know what a no deal is and what is not. And they are not going to be fooled, and they will kick up a right stink if Boris Johnson backtracks. He will. So if he genuinely believes that this is all a ruse to get his deal, if he genuinely believes he is going to get a deal on his terms, then he's just going to find himself completely boxed into a corner. And there'll be nothing he can do about it. He either goes ahead with the no deal, in which case he remains as Prime Minister, but then faces a backlash in the country, I hope. Or he tries to backtrack and then is politically assassinated for doing so. In which case he loses his political power, which is what this is all about. So, yeah, even if you accept the notion that he is actually trying to get a deal, which I don't, but I'm not certain on that. I allowed myself 10% likelihood of that, roughly. I didn't sit there with a calculator or anything working it out, but roughly that. Gut feeling. Even if that were the case, that still doesn't mean there won't be a no deal, because I don't see how politically he can avoid it with the path he's set himself on. If he doesn't... the only way I could think of it was if, as a result of the corona crisis, he used that as an excuse to extend the transition period, which he might actually get away with. The fact that he is not doing so. Maybe he's waiting till it gets really bad. That's the only thought I had. But if he's not, if he is actually wanting to go ahead with it, this transition period definitely ending at the end of this year, I don't see how he can get a deal that he will sell to those people that will know what's going on. But that's my view anyway. Obviously time will tell on that one. Right, next one, a little bit of a science corner. So a couple of comments from the same point. I've just picked out a couple of someone going on it. It's about this herd immunity thing. So I talked about this yesterday, I think. getting it all mixed up in my head in terms of the order I have to do these. I've now got a situation where when I was doing Corona videos, YouTube were just demonetizing them. Now it looks like they may have changed their guidelines, so there's a couple have been monetized, but it's taken a very, very long time to review. So I'm having to do them quite a long time in advance. And when I can't do them that far in advance, just risking it. But anyway, so I was talking about the herd immunity here. And basically what I was saying in the video is the general science isn't ridiculous. It's just, it doesn't seem practical to me to do it. Plus, it requires lots of people to become infected with the most virulent form of it, which of course means all those vulnerable people will succumb. And, and that's a horrific way to treat it. But there's a lot of talk about, oh no, that's not how herd immunity works. It is, but let's just go through and these are bits of the comments, I'll grant you, these are bits of them. It says, what the government is proposing is not herd immunity as immunologists think of it. It actually is. I'll grant you it won't work, but that's not to say that it's not herd immunity as immunologists would think of it. It says, there is no vaccination involved with the government strategy because at this time there is no vaccine. There is this thing going around from well-meaning people that herd immunity can only be developed with a vaccination program. That is not true. A vaccination program is the safest and most effective way. And I mean, both together. It's the safest way because essentially the way a vaccine works, for those who don't know, is you are given a weakened form of whatever it is, in this case, it would be a virus. So it's not strong enough to actually overpower your body, but your immune system will still recognize it and develop antibodies for it, so that if ever you are exposed to the full form of it, the full strength form of it, you've already got the antibodies made up, and so your body can fight it off. So, and vaccination works, as I say, in those two ways, in terms of safe and effective in two ways. One, it means the safety part of it because it's a either dead or weakened form of it, of the pathogen in your system. It's safe to give it to even elderly people, and they should be fine. And effective in that you can roll it out, if necessary, across the whole population. You can give it to everyone. Not exactly at the same time because there's only so many clinics, but you could do it fairly. If you had the stocks of vaccine, you could do it fairly quickly. And so it becomes very effective. You can actually create immunity in pretty much, if there's 100% take up, pretty much 100% of the population. The reason why this particular immunity is a problem is not because vaccination is the only way to do it. It is not. It's just the most effective because it's not realistic just allowing something to run rampant. First of all, you would kill off a lot of people because a lot of people would contract it, because you need a lot of people to contract it. You need as many as people possible. But also, there are suggestions that even if you recover from this, that you will not develop any immunity for it. There have been it is a small number of cases, it is not conclusive, but there have been a small number of cases, in China and Japan at least, of people that have contracted the corona, have recovered from it, and then have contracted it again. They were not immune. And you think about it, we don't become immune to everything like this. We don't become immune to the common cold. We don't become immune to flu, or different strains of these things for a start off. We catch these, each year we'll probably catch a cold at some point, most of us. We may get flu every few years indeed. I mean, I've had flu a few times. I've only had it twice where it's really hit me very badly. Ironically, when I was much younger than I am now. More recently, when I've had flu-like conditions, you don't always know it's flu. It's tended to make me feel a bit crap, sometimes too crap to get into work. I mean, you shouldn't get into work anyway because spreading it to others. But it hasn't really laid me low in the way that it has before. But nonetheless, I'm not immune. I could easily get flu again. I could get a sniffle now, and it could be just a cold, or it could be flu, or it could be corona. I don't know. I haven't got a clue. It could be anything. I'm not developing any immunity to it. So there is a strong suggestion that it's not going to provide immunity. Now, the next little comment here I thought was interesting because it's a statistical thing. It says, update, so to be effective, herd immunity, vaccination rates have to be at least 80%, blah, blah, blah. Now, let me explain this really quickly. It's a little bit massive. I'm not going to go into the detail mass, don't worry. So what the UK government are saying is, and this is where some other people are latching onto the wrong thing. So the UK government was saying, the so-called scientific experts, which I'm quite sure are not wanting to say this, but they're just doing it to toe the line, have said that they need 60% of the population to become immune to develop this herd immunity. And a lot of people are latching onto that, saying they want 60% of the population to contract the virus. No. To get 60% immunity, you need more than 60% of the population to contract the virus. A lot more. Because not everyone will develop immunity. Some people may develop immunity by virtue of the fact they'll stop breathing permanently. But we don't like to think about that. But it's a statistical thing. So what they're talking about there, I mean, really, to get proper immunity in a population, you want 100%. In reality, you can effectively get away, in terms of herd immunity, with less than 100%, because it's basically a statistical thing. The higher the percentage of the population that are immune to something, to a pathogen, the less likely it is to propagate, because it's less likely that two people who are not immune are going to come into contact with each other, and one of whom contracts it from somewhere and passes it to someone else who's not immune, and then that they pass it on to someone else, and it ends up getting out of control. What I suspect the 60% is based on is a figure that they consider an acceptable risk. In other words, it means that it will happen and people will contract it, but few enough that they think they can contain it. And I say think they can contain it. They can't know that. 80%, so the higher that percentage, the better. So when we're talking about here, for it to be effective, 80%, it needs to be greater than 80% indeed for us to think that even if people weren't immune, that their chances of contracting it would be very low. There is always an above zero chance of contracting it when you are not immune, even if the vast majority of the population are. So it's a statistical measure that it's literally. So I think the government's thing about saying 6%, it's not when people, the suggestion here is the government is wrong in saying 6% enough. It's not wrong. It means that they are considering a higher risk to be acceptable than sane people would, is the reality there. So there we go. Hopefully that explains a few things there as well. Whether you choose to believe it or not is another matter. And I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.